Good afternoon, Mrs. Shuman. Now, I just want to deal with a very small matter that you told us about earlier. You said at some point you had gone into the building, that's to say Ashman's building, to retrieve your glasses. Is there anything that you would like to add to that?
Yes, ma'am. The sequence of events as it transpired, it wasn't the day of the bomb scare that I went in. It was actually the day following.
To get your glasses,
That's
that
correct.
is.
That's correct.
All right.
And we could, if you don't mind, I'd like to maybe speak on that a little bit later.
Sure. All right. So let's get back to where we left off. You said the bomb scare had been called. You saw Assistant Commissioner Thomas, but you waited in the tabulation room together with others.
We were at the front entrance, myself and a whole lot of other persons from other political parties, including members of the diplomatic corps. We were all at the front entrance when that occurred.
And did you go back to the tabulation room?
After everyone said, after myself and the people around me said that we were not leaving, the police then departed, left the premises. Well, when I say police, I'm saying the ones that just arrived to address that issue. And then many of us went straight back into the tabulation room.
Sure. And while you were in the tabulation room, apart from party agents and observers, did you see any GCOM employees?
I don't recall seeing if they would have been in there, they would have been not wearing GCOM uniform.
Okay. Are you familiar with the name Valerie Garrido-Lowe?
Yes, I am.
And are you familiar with the name Sidney Alicock?
I am.
And did you see those two persons in the tabulation room that day, or when you returned to the room?
When I returned to the room, there was some commotion outside. I do recall there was some kind of an altercation occurring at the escalators between members of the PNC. I don't want to say AP and UAFC because they're specific to that party, and engaged in a very heated argument, very boisterous, in an argument with members of the PPP. And you could see that from the room when you looked out because of the way the room is situated. Through the glass doors and the escalators were right there, so you could see that clearly outside.
How far is the escalator from the door to the glass room?
It's about 30, 40 feet, if that much.
Sure.
Mr. Shuman,
Yes, sir.
you were an accredited representative of your party
Yes, sir.
by GCOM.
Yes.
Were you issued with a badge identifying you as an accredited representative?
Not through the tabulation process.
Not through the tabulation?
Correct. I was not issued with the, if I recall correctly, because, sir, for where I contested elections was where at least my home district is in Pakuri, St. Cuthbert's Mission. If there were accreditation given out prior to that, I was not in receipt of one. However, I always took around my identification card with me. At the time, I had my driver's license, so that was the primary form of identification that I used. Fair to say that as a presidential candidate for a political party, I was known to many of the GCOM staff and many of the members of the
let me stop you. Yeah. The focus of my question is not who knew you,
Right.
but the focus of my question is really to determine whether you needed to have the permission of GCOM, notwithstanding the fact that you were a presidential candidate in the elections, if you needed the permission of GCOM through accreditation to be in the tabulation room?
Not to my knowledge.
So anybody could have gone into the tabulation room?
It would appear as though very many people were in there who were not party representatives charged with such responsibilities.
So it was a free-for-all, more or less.
It may have seemed that way.
Now, can you remember who from your party was accredited?
As counting agent, when I say accredited, my understanding is people,
Accredited by GCOM. Can you remember now who from your party had been accredited?
Okay, and I just want to expound on my understanding of it and what I'm getting at. We had submitted names to the Guyana Elections Commission of persons that we wanted to take up specific responsibilities on behalf of our party.
Right.
I do not recall having any documentation, any piece of identification, ever to go that way, that pretty much said you have to take this and show it when you got in. So in that sense, the leader of the party, I'd say by nature of being the presidential candidate, was technically accredited, plus the chief counting agent and any other agent that we would have put on a list as to who were going to support the process.
Sure. Now, you said that I asked you about two names, and then we got a little sidetracked into the elevator episode. So I asked you if you were familiar with the names Valerie Goridolo and Sidney Alicock, and you said yes. Had you known those persons before?
Sidney Alicock at the time was the fourth Vice President and Minister of Amerindian Affairs, Indigenous Peoples Affairs, my apologies, and Valerie Goridolo was the Minister within the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs.
And did you speak to them, or did they speak to you?
After the commotion outside of the escalator, from where I observed in the tabulation room, a whole series of government ministers walked into the building. They had a conference, in my humble view, because they didn't walk straight to the tabulation room. Then after that, they proceeded into the tabulation room. Accompanied with Sidney Alicock, Valerie Goridolo was also George Norton, Keith Scott, and Valda Lawrence eventually came into the room. Mm-hmm. I had expressed very forcefully my disappointment in their presence and their participation in a process that was meant to deny people their franchise. And that is a matter of, I'd say, some YouTube videos.
To whom did you express those views?
To Sidney Alicock, Valerie Goridolo, George Norton, and Keith Scott.
And why did you speak to those people in particular?
Because I strongly believe that as Indigenous leaders, they needed to have acted in a more responsible manner. As an Indigenous leader myself, I find it appalling when I see that sometimes my people are dragged into things that does not represent the best interests of the people.
Okay. And did any of the four reply to you?
The subject of discussion with Keith Scott was what he had said in Parliament, that Indigenous peoples are greedy. It is on that ground that I engaged him after he turned around and started smiling and throwing some banter my way, and I simply related to him that he should be the last person to speak since
okay, so we want to stick to the point. So basically you had an exchange with them, and in particular with Keith Scott.
Correct.
Yes?
Mr. Shuman, one of the things you said you engaged him on was their presence.
Yes.
You mean presence in the tabulation room or at GCOM or at that building?
Their presence in the tabulation room.
Yes.
Yes.
So the question I want to ask you, what was different about their presence from yours?
You
have no accreditation from GCOM. You are asserting an entitlement to be there by virtue of being a presidential candidate, and you feel that presenting your ID was sufficient. Well, these are political operatives.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So,
Prior-
so tell me why you
Prior
objected to
to elections, we were all parties, I'm not saying we, all parties were subjected to a brief by the Guyana Elections Commission as to the process, how it should unfold, and the persons that that lead political parties, presidential candidates, their responsibilities, and how far they can and cannot go in certain aspects of the conduct of elections. Basically, as a presidential candidate, we are permitted to observe any components or the entirety of the process if we so deemed. By virtue of that, my presence at the tabulation center was non-contentious, and that was to the persons who were accredited as counting agents or presidential candidates. I do not recall seeing Sidney Alicock, Valerie Gridolo, or any of the other ministers. I don't recall seeing them on a list of people who were accredited to be there or authorized to be there, nor did I see them on any list that said that they were presidential candidates for their respective parties.
So when you told us earlier that you had not been accredited by GCOM, would it be fair to say that that is not entirely accurate? Would it be fair to say that you had had a meeting with GCOM and it was your understanding that as party leader you were entitled to attend the verification process at Ashman's building?
More so that he might have appeared on a list of accredited persons that he spoke about.
Sure. So was that your understanding?
My understanding is that accreditation comes with some degree of identification, that you have gone through some process, whether it's a briefing or not. I have not been furnished with anything that officially gives me that permission, but based on the briefing that we would have had with the Guyana Elections Commission, that persons within the scope of being on a list or presidential candidates were permitted. I don't know if that, in your humble view, is seen as accreditation.
Well,
Right,
Can I ask you, are you aware that there were both GCOM personnel and political party agents who were wearing GCOM issued identification badges?
I do not recall seeing that.
Okay. Okay, that's a good enough answer.
Thank you.
Yes. So after the meeting, after the briefing with GCOM, as far as you understood, you were entitled to attend the verification process at Ashman's building after the close of polls. Is that correct?
It is my understanding that as presidential candidate, we could have observed any of the process throughout the country, not only at Ashman's building.
Sure. And you spoke about a list. Did you see that list? The GCOM list?
I did not. We had furnished GCOM with a series of names that would be able to represent us at certain points.
Sure. So it would be correct to say that the persons whose names you just called and with whom you had the exchange, you are not able to say whether they were on any approved list or not.
I would not be able to say.
Good. So you said that there had been what you describe as a ruckus on the escalator outside of the room, and did you later see Mr. Clement Mingo, the returning officer?
That's correct, ma'am. After the ruckus on the escalator, after all of the ministers walked into the room and seated themselves in a very specific area in front of the APNU AFC counting agents, Mr. Mingo was accompanied by a whole series of security officers, some of them in plain clothes, some in police uniform, and came into the room. the CEO was also in the room at the time.
And did Mr. Mingo at that point say anything?
Mr. Mingo indicated after a boisterous complaint as to why we are not continuing with the process, proceeded to say he is there to make a declaration.
And when he said he was here to make a declaration, what did you understand him to be talking about?
In terms of elections, I would understand it to be that he is there to declare the results of Region 4.
Okay, and as far as you, sorry?
At the time when Mr. Mingo said he was there to make a declaration, and as far as you are aware, was the tabulation for Region 4 completed?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you.
When Mr. Mingo said that he was going to make a declaration, what occurred?
When he said that he was going to make a declaration, the entire room, save for the APNU AFC representatives and the ministers who would have entered and seated themselves, everyone else erupted in very boisterous protest. Our position was that we have not concluded the tabulation process, verification tabulation of Region 4, and it is completely and absolutely premature to make a declaration without going through that process.
Sure. Was he able to make the declaration?
Over the noise, I could not hear
Okay.
what he had to say. He did say something, but I could not hear anything that he said.
Sure. And after you heard him say whatever it is he said, which you couldn't hear, did he remain in the room?
No, ma'am. After he said what he had to say, he exited the room escorted by his security.
Mm-hmm.
A large crowd followed him. He went up the escalators. Party members of various parties were not permitted to go up the escalators.
Where were you at this time?
I was standing in the, I'd say in the foyer, at the bottom of the escalators. We had all followed him out a little bit, and that is how I know we were not permitted to go up the escalator.
Right. So, did you see him after he went on the escalator?
No, ma'am. What I did see were a whole lot of, because at that time the entire floor was taken over by a sea of people, that to charge through or get through them would have been a really difficult task. But I also heard from the other parties right there. When I say heard, because I was present, a loud, boisterous chant, no, 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 no. And when I looked up, Mr. Mingo was a few stories up, uttering something.
Okay. And I take it you were not in a position to hear what he was saying?
No, ma'am, I was not.
Mr. Shuman,
Yes, sir.
prior to this day, when you saw this delegation of government ministers, APNU AFC government ministers, had you seen them there for any part of the process before that day?
No, Your Honor. They had not been present at any juncture through the day 1, day 2, pretty much only up until that point before Claimant Mingo walked into the room.
Yes, Mr. Joseph.
Yes. Now, I want to take you back a little bit to before Mr. Mingo attempted to make or made these declarations. Are you familiar with the name Karen Cummings?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
And can you tell us what position Ms. Cummings held in March, well, in 2020?
At that time, when I saw Ms. Cummings, she would have been holding the post as Minister of Foreign Affairs.
And did you see Ms. Cummings on the day of the attempted declaration?
Yes, ma'am. Before Mr. Mingo came into and before all of the government ministers marched into the building, I was part of a group of people who stood at a door inside Ashman's building on the second floor, where all of the observers and the diplomats were summoned to a meeting convened by Ms. Cummings. I stood at the door and listened to her threaten to revoke the accreditation of these observers, and she was accompanied at that meeting by Roxanne Myers.
When you say Roxanne Myers, you mean the Deputy CEO of GCOM?
That's correct, ma'am.
Now, you speak about a group of observers. Can you now recall any of those observers in particular?
Former PM of Barbados, former PM of Jamaica. There were the American, European, Canadian ambassadors and High Commissioner in there. AmCham, and there were a few other domestic observers, accredited observers in that room.
And when you say former Prime Minister of Barbados, are you referring to former Prime Minister Owen Arthur?
That's affirmative, ma'am.
And when you say the former Prime Minister of Jamaica, are you referring to former Prime Minister Bruce Golding?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, when Ms. Cummings threatened to revoke their accreditation as observers, did any of these gentlemen say anything?
Mr. Owen Arthur, he protested very vociferously, stating that the accreditation was not given by the government of Guyana but by the Elections Commission. They were operating under international treaties and international law, and there was a whole, I'd say a whole lot of support for his position.
What did Ms. Cummings say or do?
Ms. Cummings, she did not say much else. A phone call came through on her phone, which Ms. Myers was holding. She gave it to Ms. Karen Cummings. She took the phone call and then exited the room.
And just left the observers sitting there?
That's affirmative. Some of them were standing at that moment.
Sure. Now, can you tell us about your observations about the reaction of the observers to this statement by Ms. Cummings?
It was one of disgust, absolute and utter disgust, that you could invite foreign missions to come and observe a democratic process. And not only to the observers, I think the members of the diplomatic corps to come and observe a democratic process, and when they get to the point where they're doing what they had committed to do, you were threatening to remove their accreditation. It was utter disgust.
Did Ms. Cummings give a reason for wanting to remove their accreditation?
Not that I could hear.
And during all of this, you were standing by the door to the room, according to what you've told us?
That's correct, ma'am.
Did you at any time move from the door of that room while Ms. Cummings was speaking?
No, ma'am.
Now, during the course of that day, did you remain in Ashman's building?
Yes, I remained in Ashman's building, what I would say for the entirety of the day up until around 5 o'clock.
After the episode on the second floor with the observers, did you return to the tabulation room?
Yes, ma'am.
Was any verification, counting, or tabulation process going on in that room?
There was a complete cessation of activities in relation to GCOM's process.
What then occurred after you returned to the tabulation room?
When I returned to the tabulation room, all of the political parties present, we were just hovering around, wondering what next. The observer missions were present. At one point, we were overcome by fear that some harm may come to the chair of the Guyana Elections Commission since we had not seen her. Attempts to contact her had proven futile, and we were informed that she was being held in the building. Well, when I say informed, you know.
Yes, you
the
heard
suspicion.
certain things.
Yes.
So did you go anywhere? Did you leave the tabulation room?
When
Just a second, sir.
when that suspicion came up, most of us, when I say most, political parties present stayed in the room, and after there was a suspicion that she is being held captive, I personally, and I will say this, I personally feared that some harm may have come or may come to the chair of GCOM.
So what did you do?
Can I expound on my reasons why the fear overcame me?
No, I don't think that's necessary. That's personal to you. So tell me, having felt this way, what did you do?
It is not only a fear personal to me, ma'am. It's a fear that I think the entire presence there really felt. And I could say that because I had discussions with them.
Right.
The fear,
Just a second. The chair would like to speak.
You have to, what you want to tell us is not really necessary. We have certain terms of reference, and the commission, aided by council, is keeping that in mind and keeping focus on the terms of reference, so that these personal feelings you may have had or engendered are not really necessary. What we want to know is what happened that day. So you just said that you had this fear that the chair, that some harm may have come to her. I think what council is trying to get from you, as a result of that fear, did you do anything? And if so, what did you do?
respectfully, Your Honor, I strongly believe that the actions that ensued emanated from somewhere. And I will try my utmost to stick to counsel's questioning. There is one thing that I wanted to communicate very explicitly, is the implication, and maybe not necessarily for the commission, but we also have to understand that there are people watching this who may not be clear on the process.
Okay. So, Mr. Shuman, the commissioners are there to guide the process, all right? So let us see if we can move ahead. If any clarification is required, then we will seek the guidance of the commissioners. So having people talk about, well, what's happening with the chair and that kind of thing, did you remain in the tabulation room?
After those fears, if I were to put it that way, a group of people went up the escalator.
Were you part of that group?
I followed the group.
Okay. And can you remember now who was in the group?
I cannot remember all of the persons there.
Can you remember any names at all? Any persons who'd been in that group going upstairs?
Nigel Hines, Josh Kanai, those are two names that come to me immediately.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you followed them, and where did you go?
We went to another floor in the Ashman's building,
Yes.
where we suspected, or we were told, that the chair was being held, for lack of a better word.
Okay. So who told you that? Can you remember?
Other party supporters, other party members.
Okay. But you, up to that point, you did not know what was happening to the chair. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you were acting on the basis of what you were being told by people around.
That's correct.
So when you went up to the other floor, can you recall whether it was the second floor, the third floor?
I cannot recall.
When you went up to the floor, was the same group that you had been following there?
That's correct.
Well, did you see any members of that group do anything?
When we got to a specific door that was heavily guarded by police, some members of that group charged at the door, forcing it open.
And when they forced the door open, did any members of that group enter the room?
Yes,
Did you enter?
I did not, but I could see clearly because the room had a glass window on the outside. It was a wooden door, and there were curtains. When the door was breached, one of the persons that got in opened the curtain so that people could see from outside to in, and the door was wide open. There were police officers in that room.
Okay.
There were police officers, you said?
In the room, that's
In the room.
affirmative. That's affirmative.
Just
And
police officers.
That's affirmative. Police officers and the person that breached the door.
So the chairman was not in the room?
No, sir.
And what, if anything, did the police officers do at that point?
The police officer threatened to arrest anyone who came in. They were manhandling Mr. Hines. They had arrested Josh Kanai at the time.
Okay, so did you see, after going into that room, did you see whether Josh Kanhai did anything else?
No, ma'am, I did not.
Okay. And after the police spoke, said that they were going to arrest people and so on, what did you do?
We all hovered in front of the door. I stood there behind the crowd, inquiring as to where the chair may be. And I was told that the chair was ushered into another room, and that room is adjoined to the one that was just breached by another wooden door, and it was heavily guarded.
Okay, so who was telling you this?
Other supporters who were around, other parties, supporters,
Okay,
party members.
so you didn't know this for a fact?
No, ma'am.
And you didn't see anybody being escorted into another room?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So, I beg your pardon, the chair wants to ask you something.
You were interested in ascertaining the whereabouts of the chair? That's all. What was your purpose of going into the room?
To ascertain the safety of the chair, not only her
The
whereabouts.
safety of the chair.
That's affirmative.
But would that have been your responsibility?
I think it is.
Having gone there and having seen the team of police officers, did you think that was your responsibility?
I think as a political leader, Your Honor, that it is the responsibility of every civic person, their civic duty, to ensure that no harm comes to any public employee, including my own.
Yes, I accept what you say. But over and above that, the police have special duties. So having gone to the room, your intention is to ensure that no harm is brought to this individual. And you come upon several police officers manning a door. And the door is breached, several police officers are inside the room. You still, at that time, thought it was your duty to ascertain whether the safety of the chair.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Shuman, this morning you told us that you over the course of the 2 days or so, you had made several attempts to reach the chair. Do you recall telling us that?
Yes, I do.
Now, had you,
Councillor, might I offer some information? And to the chair, respectfully. Not that I was pursuing or going down a path of tangent, but it is meant to qualify the very same question that you brought and Councillor is bringing as to the purpose, why certain actions followed. The implications of having harm come to the chair without any kind of verification would mean that there could be no declaration of results. It would mean that that the government may sit in breach of certain articles of the Constitution. It would mean that we would have to go and rerun the entire elections. That is what drove our actions to ensure and to verify that the chair was safe.
yes, and I just want to take you back a bit. So, over the 2 days or so that we spoke about, you told us that you had made several attempts to communicate with the chair as the leader of your party. Had you been successful in doing so?
No, ma'am.
Had you telephoned?
Yes,
And had you messaged?
Yes, ma'am.
And had you received a reply?
No, ma'am.
And prior to those,
Prior to those efforts,
no, I wasn't finished.
oh, my apologies. My apologies. I thought
That's
you.
okay. Prior to those efforts, were you in contact by these very means with the chair?
At the commencement of the tabulation of Region 4,
Even beyond that?
beyond that, I would communicate with the chair in terms of electoral matters as the leader of my party, and she would respond in kind.
By telephone, by message?
That's affirmative, sir.
At about 5 o'clock on that day, were you still at Ashman's building?
At about 5 o'clock, Dr. Ali and his team asked if I would be interested in conducting a press briefing with them, to which I agreed.
And Dr. Ali is now the president.
That's affirmative.
And was this press briefing held?
This press briefing we had been transported to to a sleep-in hotel where there was a room prepared with cameras and members of the media, a head table where political leaders would sit, and we started into the press briefing.
Were you the only party leader invited to that press
No,
conference?
ma'am. There were many other political leaders, not from the APNU AFC. They had been, what I would say, silent to what we would have witnessed all along, maybe even active participants, I cannot say. But others, other newer party representatives were also present at that briefing.
Sure. Now, before you did that briefing, did you get a phone call from anyone?
Before we did the briefing, I was called by our agent, Andrew Ramcharan, stating that TSU ranks had shown up, along with Ms. Myers, stating that they have to evict the building.
And when you say TSU, do you mean the Tactical Support Unit?
That's affirmative.
So, as far as you know, people at that point were being asked by Ms. Myers and the TSU ranks to evacuate the Ashman's building.
That's affirmative.
Now, I want to take you to the next day. Did you receive any information from GCOM?
The next day, I did not receive information from GCOM.
Did you return to Ashman's the next day?
I did.
And were you able to enter the building?
Initially, when we got to Ashman's, the very same process on entry into the barricaded area was operational that day. We were not permitted in the building. I was not permitted in the building immediately. Myself, members of the diplomatic corps, observer missions, and other political agents of other political parties all stood and hovered outside of the building.
Right. Is this the day that you had to ask for permission to get your glasses back?
That's affirmative.
Right. You entered the building at some point?
That's affirmative. I had requested of Ms. Myers to recover my glasses because, in my humble view, they're very good and needed.
Right.
And
So,
costly.
did you go to the tabulation room to try to retrieve your glasses?
That's affirmative. I was escorted into the building
By whom?
by, at the time it was a police officer, escorted into the building. Inside the building, there was heavy police presence. There was a whole series of GCOM staff. There were a whole series of garbage bags containing I don't know what. The entire tabulation room was cleared. All the tables and chairs were stacked. There was nothing in that tabulation room.
Did you find your glasses?
I scoured one of the garbage bags and I found my glasses.
Okay. And did you then leave the building?
I was escorted out of the building, yes.
And while you were outside of the building, did you receive notification of a court ruling about the process restarting?
While we were outside of the building, there were two officers from the court that came to the gate with a document in hand. When they attempted to go into the building, the police said that they are not permitted to, and it was a male and a female. At that refusal by the police to let officers of the court in, the male turned and started walking in the direction of the court. Many calls by his partner or accomplice at the time, seemingly an officer of the court, because the person was so tired. The male that walked away did not even look back.
Right. Okay. So you left the building, you waited outside. You were eventually readmitted into Ashman's building, correct?
Eventually, we were informed that an injunction had been filed, that the process has to resume, and that we are going to be starting that process at the back end of Ashman's building. There was a room inside that.
And at some point, did you go into that room at the back of Ashman's
That's
building?
affirmative.
When you went in there, did you see Mr. Clement Mingo at any point?
On initial entry, I did not see Mr. Mingo. After everyone was seated, Mr. Mingo walked into the room and informed the parties, agents present, the observers present, that he was in receipt of a court order to redo the tabulation and to prescribe by certain conditions that were set by the court.
So what then occurred? Very briefly, tell us what then occurred. What process began?
There was a large television screen, there was a projector, and some SOPs on the table with a computer. They started to project these SOPs.
Who started to project the SOPs?
GCOM officials.
Yes.
And when they projected the SOPs, it was very clear that the numbers were altered.
Why do you say that?
In some instances, because of the formation of numbers, some cases you would see a 7 changed into a 9, some cases a 1 changed into a 7, 5s were changed into 8s.
And what did you do at that point?
There was a very large uproar from every party except the APNU AFC agents present.
And what did GCOM do at that point?
At that point, Mr. Claremont Mingo paused the process. It seemed as though he was willing to listen to reason. And the APNU AFC agent that was present, Ms. Carol Joseph, started yelling, not verbatim, but to the extent as, who really is in charge of this process? Are they in charge of it, or are you in charge of it? You need to take control of this.
Mm-hmm.
To which he became very, I wouldn't say assertive, but very determined that he is going to conduct a process, whether we like it or not.
So did you remain there?
Yes.
And did he continue that process?
He continued the process. There was an uproar from, once again, party supporters, all but APNU AFC agents.
Mm-hmm.
At which point, one of the members of the PPP was very boisterous, and also another observer was asking, well, we can't see what's going on there. It is going up too fast, and there are some discrepancies in what you're putting up. We would like some time to at least write these things down. He did not acquiesce to that request to slow things down, and Ms. Joseph threatened to stomp on the face of one of the observers and also to the PPP party rep that was protesting.
Okay. Now, when these threats were made, did the police intervene?
No, ma'am. The police stood quietly.
Okay. Now, was there an injunction served on Mr. Mingo by a court-martial?
My understanding from what I witnessed there is that an officer of the court came in, and in the process, he interrupted and said, well, I just received an injunction that we have to subscribe to a process.
Who is the he?
Mr. Mingo, my apologies.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
In the event that you did describe this person, forgive me, I might have missed it. Who was this person, Carol Joseph? Did you know anything about her?
Prior to elections, I had not known Carl Joseph. During the tabulation process, I came to know Carl Joseph as a party agent for the APNU AFC party.
Thank you.
so Mr. Mingo indicated to the group of people in that particular room that he had been served with a court document.
That's affirmative.
And did he say what was to happen next?
He indicated that he does not have the facilities at Ashman's building to comply with the court order, that we are going to have to move this process to the Guyana Elections Commission's head office, where he has all of the equipment that is required to comply with the court order.
And did this move take, I beg your pardon? Commission. Did this move take place the same day or the following day?
This move took place within a matter of hours. We were asked to pack our things and reconvene at the Guyana Elections Commission head office.
Can you recall the address of that?
I cannot. I know exactly where it is. The corner of Cowan and High Street.
And when you got there, which particular area did you go to? Were you inside the building, outside the building?
We were under a shed in the parking lot. Not inside the building.
And when
inside the compound.
When you say we, to whom do you refer?
When I say we, I am saying myself, other party agents from other political parties, and other observers.
And did you see any GCOM staff there?
Yes, quite a few GCOM staff,
Did
including Mr. Mingo, Claremont Mingo, Roxanne Myers. I did not see Keith Lowenfield there. There were also some other low-ranking Guyana Elections Commission staff.
Did you see any police officers there?
Absolutely. I saw a whole, what seemed like a hive of police officers being commanded by Mr. Azor, then Superintendent Azor.
Sure. Now, I want you to describe the setup in the parking lot for me in a bit more detail than you have done.
When we arrived, there was one projector, there was a cardboard box. If I could put some direction to this.
Please do.
In the northwest corner was a projector on a
Yes.
table with some documents on top of that. In the eastern corner, there was a massive cardboard box with a bed sheet strewn very loosely on that cardboard box. On the western to southwest corner were all chairs for party agents and observers to sit.
Okay. Did you take a photograph of that that object on which what you referred to as a bed sheet was pinned up?
I was prohibited from taking a photo. However, there were people with cameras that would have snuck pictures of that setup.
And did you subsequently receive a photograph
I did.
of the bed sheet?
I did.
And if you see that bed sheet or whatever it was pinned up again, will you be able to identify the area for us?
I'm not sure I'd be able to recognize the bed sheet, but I'd recognize the photo.
Okay. I'm asking that the witness be shown us its document. So a document has been placed in your hand.
This is it.
Can you tell us what it shows?
It shows everything that I would have seen. A cardboard box with a bed sheet strewn across it, the projector on the table.
And perhaps I could ask that that be admitted. Yes, I think it's B. Yes. Yes, LSP. Could you just put it back in your witness's hand, please? So I'm asking you to look at a document which has now been marked as LSB, which is the same photograph you just described. Now, could you hold up that document? It's LS1B. Could you hold it up for me and indicate where the GCOM employees would have been?
The GCOM employees, they're out of this frame right now.
Right.
But if we were to think of this as a 3D photo,
Sure.
there were GCOM employees on this side. Also on this side, there were police hovering in the back on this corner, and there were also some GCOM employees on the far end this way.
And where were party agents, party
agents
leaders, observers?
Would have been sitting in my hand,
Okay, sure.
facing the bed sheet.
Yes. And about how far away from the bed sheet were you all sitting?
About 20 feet, 25 feet.
Okay, thank you. Now, while you were in that area, that new area, did Mr. Mingo do anything?
They had started just after that photo was taken. They had started to seemingly, and I say seemingly because I don't know what the court order would have said, to comply, and they started to place the SOPs under the projector so it could be projected on the bed sheet.
And were you able to see the numbers on the bed sheet?
We could, but not very clearly.
And did anyone make any objection or protest at that time?
Absolutely. Various party supporters were there. There was also Mr. Yearwood, who represented ANOG, Ms. Carol Joseph, and after the protest started to erupt, I think Ms. Joseph uttered something which resulted in Jonathan Yearwood getting up and approaching her.
Okay, so there was an altercation
Yes.
between Ms. Joseph and Mr. Yearwood.
Yes,
And did the police arrest Mr. Yearwood?
they did.
Now, you remained there, and at any point, did you see the CEO?
I did not see the CEO for the time that I was there.
And did you see the deputy CEO?
I did. While all of us were sitting, the EU observer mission had attempted to take some pictures of the bed sheet, to which he was flatly denied. They said that you cannot, even though he stated his purpose for being there, why they need the information to ensure that their report is at least is appropriately put together. And the DCEO was walking around with a camera in her hands, taking pictures of people in the vicinity, including all of the people who were seated.
Okay. And when did she try to take your photograph?
She did. She tried to take, well, I would say that she did, because the camera did sound and it was pointed at me. And I told her that I do not want to be photographed.
Did she
said,
reply?
She said, if you don't want to be photographed, then you could leave.
So after all of this, did you remain there?
After all of this, I was too disgusted, I left.
If I may just have 1 minute, please.
Counsel, can I
no,
ask
yes.
a question?
Sure.
I do recall furnishing you with a few other videos that I have not seen presented.
Yes, that's what we're trying to work out. Now, you had told us earlier in your testimony that you had received a certain video and that you had sent it on to the CEO.
That's affirmative.
And you had even followed it up with a WhatsApp message and you'd got a reply from the CEO.
That's affirmative, that he would deal with it.
Yes. And you also told us about seeing Mr. Mengo attempting to make a declaration.
That's affirmative.
Now, I am going to ask that 2 videos be played, and you can tell us if you are able to assist us with either or both of them.
I think there would have been 3 videos, the one where I was in the room and...
Just a second. Could it be played? Could it be shown on the screen?
Started counting it? an eye on that guy over there, Dave. Keep an eye on that guy over there. I'm videotaping him. Keep him also. He's now sealing that envelope. See that?
Well, Your Honor, from what I understand is that those envelopes, having gone through, and if I may expound a little bit, having gone through the recount process, those envelopes would have contained electoral papers, ballots, official documents, and so on and so forth.
Having gone through a recount process?
Yes. During the recount that followed this exercise, when we got into the recount process, the very same envelopes that we would have seen, well, I say similar envelopes that we are seeing on the screen, were contained in the boxes from the polling stations. So in this video, it would seem as though they're removing the seals from these envelopes. The purpose would have been shown in a separate video, which I'm yet to furnish counsel.
So perhaps I could assist. Now, let us take you back to when you were in the tabulation room in Ashman's, all right? The statements of polls are contained in brown envelopes looking like the ones you see in the video?
No, ma'am. The statement of polls are about this big. Mm-hmm. In the envelopes, you would have ballot papers and other statutory documents.
All right. Well, clarify this for me. When you testified earlier, you said during the course of the period of time that you were in Ashman's building, you received this particular video and you then forwarded it on to Mr. Lowenfield. Do you recall saying that?
That's correct.
And that is before any recount, correct?
That's correct.
So this video was received by you during the period of time that you have testified about today.
Correct.
And it was sent on to Mr. Lowenfield, the CEO, during the period of time that you sent today.
That's correct.
And what we see in this video shows employees wearing GCOM uniform.
That's correct.
Was that the same uniform that they were wearing during the days that you were at Ashman's building for the verification or tabulation process?
That is the same uniform that they were wearing for every visit that I had with GCOM, or every interaction that I had with GCOM officials before the elections and during the tabulation process.
Good. And those brown envelopes appear to be sealed.
That's correct.
In fact, from the video, some of them appear to carry several seals, correct?
Correct.
And what we see, or when it was paused, we saw a GCOM employee very carefully trying to remove a seal from one of those envelopes, correct?
That's correct.
Now, you are not in a position to say what was in that envelope, correct?
Correct.
All you are able to say is that you received this video during a particular time period which you have already spoken about, not so?
That's correct. I also...
Thank you. Commissioners, may I inquire whether there are any other questions with respect to this video, because I'm asking that we move on today.
There is all, apologies.
No questions, sir.
Yes. Might we move on to the next?
Councillor, there is something that within the very same video that needs also to be said, is that while one person is removing the seal, there is also another captured in the background that is also resealing it with what looks like a glue stick.
Okay, well, could we just finish that off?
You may get a better angle from your side, dude. You may get a better angle from your side. Please watching to see what I'm doing.
When you say we could see someone in the background resealing with what appears to be a glue stick, that's what we've just seen there?
That's affirmative. The gentleman with the lanyard around his neck.
Right. So I'm going to ask you, sir, from what you've told us, you had initially said that this is a video of the recount.
No, ma'am.
Hang on, please. You had initially told us that this was a video representing the recount, correct? You told us that earlier?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Hang on a second. The commissioner asked you whether this dealt with the time of the recount, which took place a period of time afterwards, the elections. And you had agreed.
I don't think that statement is entirely accurate.
Good. That's what I'm trying to get from you, because it is quite clear from what you have told us that this is a video which you received while you were at Ashman's building in the days immediately after the March 2nd, 2020 election, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Shuman, can you tell us whether what we saw just now in the video should have been happening?
Well, Your Honor, I wanted, and I will, if I may, qualify something that counsel asked that I think needs to be clearly said, is having not been exposed to the electoral process before, it would have been very difficult for me to understand what was happening, save for envelopes being open and looking like what we saw in the tabulation room with all of the bags and the envelopes, the elections envelopes. So to answer...
Stop. You were not there.
Correct.
This video was sent to you.
Correct.
You see GCOM people opening and resealing,
Correct.
but you don't know if those people were following instructions. You don't know if it was a legitimate GCOM exercise. You suspect that something was going wrong. That's what I'm gathering from you.
Yes, I do suspect something was going on.
Thank you.
And just a
and
second.
to answer the Commissioner's question,
Just a second. And is that why you sent a WhatsApp message to the CEO?
that's affirmative.
Can you say what was the CEO's response? Did you ask the CEO, well, what's happening in this video?
I did not ask him what was happening. I said, CEO, look at what your staff is doing. This should not be happening. And he said, I will deal with it.
And just to be clear, from what you've told us, you were at Ashman's building during the period March 3rd to March 5th,
That's correct.
2020. Might we move on to the other video, please?
Ridiculous.
Do you recognize what is depicted in that video?
I
The
do.
place.
I do. It's in Ashman's building.
And can you tell us what was occurring there?
Mr. Claremont Mingo, having failed to, what I would say, make a successful declaration in the first instant, after he went up the escalator, sought safety on one of the bridgeways, and proceeded to make a substantive declaration.
And can you see the bridgeway that he was on in this picture?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you indicate to us where it is?
That is inside the Ashman's building, on the stairs leading up to the third floor.
Okay, and can you identify, well, is he wearing a particular color of shirt or something that you could identify him by?
Not from where I'm standing right now.
No problem. And who were these people on the ground floor shouting unacceptable and no, 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 and so on?
Those were all political party supporters of various political parties, except for APNU AFC agents.
Sure.
And they
yes.
were also, in the crowd, there were also observers who were joining in on the chant.
Could the video just be taken to its end, please? Look at the persons on the bridge there that we are seeing. Are you able to say if one is Mr. Mingo?
To the right, the figure looks like Mr. Claremont Mingo, and to the left, the figure looks like Miss Roxanne Myers.
Okay. Sure. Could we continue?
Mr. Shuman, you would have been one of the persons on the floor that day.
That's affirmative, sir.
Who generated this video?
I am not entirely sure.
It just came to you,
That's affirmative.
anonymously.
That's affirmative.
Thank you.
And in the video, where were you in the setup? Which
I
floor were
was-
you on?
I was on the ground floor.
So you were together with the people shouting no and unacceptable and
affirmative.
so on. And were you in a position to see the persons up on the bridge that you described?
I could have seen Mr. Claremont Mingo very clearly from where I stood.
Thank you. I'm asking that this flash drive with these two videos be admitted as part of the court record and marked LS1C, please.
Clock, sir. I have one question.
Just a second. Yes, so well, it's not normal for people in the witness box to ask questions, just to answer them, but with the chairman's leave, do, yes?
Through the chair, I do recall furnishing you a video also with the threats by Miss Cummings to the observers. I'm curious to know if that is also part of this submission.
Yes. Well, I will present the evidence as is best appropriate. And I think you have assisted us sufficiently, and we're very grateful for your assistance. So these are my questions for you, unless the commissioners have questions.
Mr. Shuman, I understand your interest and your concerns about the incident involving the minister and the observers. But you know, you gave a very detailed account of that incident, and speaking for myself, I believe it is quite adequate and sufficient.
Thank you, Your Honor.
These are my questions for this witness. Might he be relieved?
Thank you very much for your attendance today. You are relieved from further attendance.
Thank you, Your Honors.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, this is as far as we can go today.
Are you likely to go anywhere tomorrow?
Hopefully.